For those of you who may not be familiar with Ananda, some people have described it more like an operetta than a community, because we have music for everything. We sing before we give a program, we sing before we take meals. When somebody is leaving, we sing a song. Anyway, we're always singing. But let's start with a prayer. Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, beloved God, great masters of self-realization, saints and sages of all religions, beloved Paramahansa Yogananda Ji, we humbly bow to you all. Bless us, by helping our consciousness, to be uplifted, and to be filled with your light, your love and joy. Oh, peace. Amen. For those of you who may not be familiar with us, my name is Nayaswamis Jyotish, or Jyotish. This is Nayaswamis Devi, and we're the worldwide directors of Ananda. Ananda started about 50 years ago, a little over 50 years ago, with its first community in the Sierra Nevada foothills. Relatively, think of kind of between Sacramento and Lake Tahoe, in that area there. And that community has been going for now over 50 years. And from that one community, Ananda has spread out to many centers, communities in this country, a big work in Italy with many centers throughout Europe, and a large and rapidly growing work in India. And so this energy that Yogananda brought some 100 years ago is really beginning to change the world and uplift consciousness, which was his mission. Today is a special day because this is the anniversary of his passing. March 7th is when he passed in 1952 at the Biltmore Hotel in Los Angeles. So, but we're here not to celebrate his passing, we're here to celebrate his life. And so 100 years ago, in 1920, he came to America. And it's a relatively miraculous, but unfortunately too long of a story to tell. But he managed to get on the very first ship that left India to come to America after the First World War. And of course there were a lot of people trying to get on that ship. He managed to be able to get a berth in semi-miraculous circumstances. He came because he had been invited to give a talk at a council of religious liberals. And so he came, but he came not because of any outward circumstances. He came to America because there was a divine plan in his coming. He came in order to begin a change that has started at that time, but has continued since that time. He's considered widely to be the father of yoga in the West. He was the first great master of yoga, great master who taught meditation. So I know you and I, you know, his mission was to change the consciousness of the planet. Now, we've been lifelong disciples of Yogananda, and of course we love him. But we'll talk about him today because that's what the Yogananda fast is about. But I do not want to imply that he is the only one who is a messenger from God. God sends messengers through all religions, in all nations, in all different kinds of ways. But for us, Yogananda is special. And so he came, imagine him coming. He was 27 at the time he came to America. He had never really spoken in English. On the ship coming over, they asked him, when they found out that he was invited to speak, they asked him, well, give us a talk, give us a speech. That was his first talk in English. He said he froze for 5 minutes. He couldn't speak a word. And then finally he got going. And everybody said afterwards, oh, that was such a wonderful talk. He said, I didn't remember a word of it. But imagine 27 years old, coming to this country. He had $500 in his pocket. He knew no one here. And his mission was to uplift the consciousness of the entire continent, ultimately the entire world. I don't know if you've ever had a car that ran out of gas and it's stuck on the road, and you had to push that car, and you pushed it a little bit, a lot of energy into it, a lot of strain, and finally you got a little bit of momentum and you got that car moving a little bit. Well, now substitute for the car, you have to push America. Imagine the kind of energy that took, because of course he wasn't pushing physically, he was pushing the consciousness of this country. And so he had to put incredible energy out. Within 2 or 3 years, he began touring around the country, and he was speaking at the largest stadiums or auditoriums in the country. He spoke at Carnegie Hall, he spoke at every place. He went to all the major cities of the country, and every place he went, he booked the largest auditorium that was available, and in most cases, that large auditorium was not enough to hold the people. There would be 3,000 or 4,000 people in the hall with several thousand waiting to get in. Now this is 3 years after not being able to give a talk in English on a ship. So imagine that energy that he had to put out. Now what kind of energy, what kind of message did he bring? Because it's one thing to say that he had big crowds of people, but you could be, I don't know, a stage magician or a rock band, or what any kind of energy that attracts people. You could attract a lot of people, but that wasn't his mission. He didn't come in order to attract people. He came in order to help change consciousness, to uplift the world consciousness. And so he would give a talk, but he would follow that talk by maybe 6 weeks. He would go from city to city. Let's say he started in New York, since we've mentioned that. He would go to Boston, he would go to Philadelphia, he would go to Chicago, he would go to Minneapolis and Seattle and Portland and Los Angeles and smaller towns, Fresno, and all kinds of places all over. He wouldn't just go and give a talk. He would stay in that place for maybe 6 weeks, and he would give a series of classes. He taught hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of people. He taught how to meditate. He taught attitudes. He taught ways of living to change the consciousness. He said that he vibrated particularly. In the Indian teachings, they say that God manifests in 8 different aspects. I won't name them, but Yogananda said that he was particularly attuned to 3 of those. One was wisdom, one was love, and one was joy. And so imagine this enormous powerhouse trying to move a continent where he was trying to uplift and change the consciousness of of a whole nation and beyond that. Now that energy has spread beyond that. But we're talking here about the early years of when he came 100 years ago. Now, you might think, well, America must have been really primed and really ready to receive this prophet from the East. I don't think so. This was the Roaring 20s, Prohibition. And then once he got through that period, he had the Depression. And once he got through that period, he had the Second World War. So it was not a time that was easy. It was not a time when people were thinking, well, I'm a little bit bored with the way things are going here. Maybe I'll go and take a class just to, keep the boredom at bay. To have the kind of energy to attract people during difficult times. Now, there's a spiritual principle that people become most ready in difficult times. In fact, I'll tell you a joke. Swami always, our teacher, Swami Kriyananda, he loved jokes, so this is a joke. This minister arrives at the pearly gates, and St. Peter is there, and the minister is quite a proud character, and he comes expecting, the angels to welcome him and to invite him in, and nobody shows up. And he waits there a day or two, and nobody shows up. And then he sees this old kind of shabbily dressed guy with a hat kind of askew on his head and stubble on his face. And he comes up to the pearly gates, and St. Peter comes running out and says, Joe, you've come. We've been waiting for you. And the minister says, well, who is Joe? He said, I'm a minister. I've given hundreds of sermons. I've welcomed people to my church, thousands of them. And who's Joe? And St. Peter says, well, he's a cab driver from New York. And the minister says, well, why do you honor him and not me? And St. Peter says, well, believe me, a whole lot more people prayed in the backseat of his cab ever did in your church. So Yogananda was putting out this enormous amount of energy to uplift consciousness, and part of that energy, part of that vibration was joy. And so he loved jokes. He would tell a joke, but he wouldn't tell a joke just to tell a joke. He would tell a joke because then people would kind of laugh and open up, and then he would slip in a spiritual principle in the flow of the energy while they were more open. But that enormous thrust of energy that he was putting out, when he came, 1920, I doubt that 100 people in America knew how to meditate. It would be very, very few people that knew how to meditate. Now, the last statistic I saw was 24 million Americans have a daily practice of meditation. So think of that change in 100 years. But he came, so he taught meditation, he taught spiritual techniques, he taught techniques of health. The wide range of what he lectured on is quite mind-boggling, actually. But it isn't that alone. He came in order to also do some things that are extremely pertinent to our day and age. One, he came to unite East and West, but that was really symbolic for uniting the planet. And so one of the things that was true then, he came right after the First World War, where nations all over the world were at war with each other. And he came in order to say, we're all one people. We're all brothers and sisters. We're all children of one same God. East and West, North and South, it does not matter what race you were born in. It does not matter. We are all children of God. Now, in the 1920s, that was a much harder message, because now we see the results of what he did 100 years later, and we think, well, of course, everybody knows that. Well, they do not know that, even today. But they really didn't know it 100 years ago. So he began putting out that kind of energy to unite East and West, to unite all of the religions. He said that the true religion is not Hinduism or Buddhism or Sufism or Islam or Christianity or those outer religions. They're all fine. But the true religion for everyone is the relationship with God. And that relationship with God does not take place on an altar that's outside of yourself. He said it takes place on the altar of the central nervous system. That's where we worship God. That's where we connect with our own divine nature. Because part of the Indian teachings, which of course he was expounding, but why call them Indian teachings? They're really the original spirituality of India is not called Hinduism. Hinduism is a name from the Indus River that I think, I don't know, Alexander the Great started that term. That's not it's Sanatana Dharma, the eternal truth, the eternal righteousness. And basically, that can be summed up by saying everything in creation is an extension of God, and ultimately everything will come back to God. And so that truth doesn't belong to one religion or another religion. It doesn't even belong to one planet. If everything comes out, then this planet, other planets, it doesn't belong to a galaxy. This galaxy, everything is united, everything is one. And so Yogananda was trying to overcome this tendency to separate into I, my, me, mine, my tribe, my language, my country. He said, we're all God's children. We all need to come together. We all need to respect each other. At that time, and still today, there was, one could say, if not a war, at least a tension between science on one hand and religion on the other. He said, why should there be a tension? Both scientists and people who are working with spirituality, they're both commonly seeking reality. One is carrying on experiments, perhaps in the laboratory, and the other is carrying on experiments in the laboratory of consciousness. And so let's unite religion and science. Let's, in fact, unite everything. Unite everything together because we all come from the one consciousness of God. Now, today, in 2020, we can say that, and most people will nod their head. But I doubt that most people were nodding their head in 1920, 100 years ago. So Yogananda came, as I was saying, not to push a car, but to push a continent, to push a whole, not landscape, but a whole mindscape of a culture that was indifferent to these truths. And now, 100 years later, there has been a profound shift. And we, Devi and I, spend quite a lot of time in India. India considers Yogananda a national hero because they see him as the person not the only person, a person who brought the great teachings from ancient times in India, great teachings to the West, and offered them. And now everybody around the globe has an appreciation for these. And I'll end just by saying probably his crowning achievement was the publishing, the writing, and the publishing of Autobiography of the Yogi. How many people here have read that book? Almost. Most people. A few haven't. If you haven't read it, you're in for one of the great adventures of your life. It's available here, and honestly, it is the book that changed my life. And I've talked with hundreds and hundreds of people who would say exactly that same thing. A book that changed people's lives. And that book went out. When Swami Kriyananda asked Yogananda, he said, I was so touched by it. It had so much magnetism. How did you do that? And Yogananda said simply, I put my vibration. Because he was working on a vibratory level and an energy level, even more than on a physical level. And by putting his vibration in that, by putting out that enormous energy that I was talking about earlier, he created an energy flow that was like a, I don't know what to even compare it to, like a nova, two neutron stars clashing together. Huge flow of energy. And when energy flows in a direction, it creates a magnetic field. And so that huge energy that he put out, that we're all one, we're all children of the same God, that the altar of spirituality is our own central nervous system. Here are the techniques to get in touch with your own self and get in touch with God. By putting out that kind of a message with that kind of an energy, he created a magnetism that has changed and uplifted the world. And it's a very, very nice thing that we are honoring his life on this day of his passing.
I also want to welcome all of you. My name is Nayaswamis Devi, and some of you have come from different Ananda communities throughout the West Coast, throughout Europe, and we're very glad you could join us. And it's such an affirmation. We're so glad you could come today, each and every one of you. It's an affirmation of saying, I will not be afraid. Of course, the coronavirus is out there, but I want to, someone sent me recently, a few days ago, a quote from Yogananda ji, and I want to share it with all of you, and I hope you can cling to these thoughts, because it's particularly relevant to the times in which we live. Unreasoning apprehension is a cause of disease. It is the real germ of all sickness. Therefore, be cautious, not fearful. Do your best to remove the causes of disease, and then be absolutely unafraid. So this is from Yogananda, and I hope you all can hold on to that. Now, as Jyotish was saying, Yogananda came to the West in 1920. So that was 100 years ago. He left on this day, March 7th, 1952, which is 68 years ago. And our friend Arnab from India shared with us yesterday, he arrived today, March 7th, from India for the first time 25 years ago. So that's a blessing and an honor in your own life. But the numbers 68, 100, they represent so little. You know, Christ came, he lived 33 years. His mission actually lasted 3 years, more or less. But that power of that soul changed the course of the West, Christ. 3 years. Yogananda had, well, he had 68 years in the West, longer time than Christ. But these numbers don't begin to convey the power and the impact that realized men and women of God bring to this world. And when we say Yogananda's mission is 100 years, that it doesn't even begin to touch the whole history. You know, for those of you, most of you have read Autobiography of a Yogi, And it talks about these great cycles of time, these ages called the Yugas. There's a wonderful documentary movie called The Great Year, which if you haven't seen it, it's worth watching, talking about these 24,000 year cycles of human evolution of consciousness, not just from Neanderthal to Cro-Magnon man, but the evolution of consciousness, starting and there's 4 ages which descend: Satya Yuga, the age of truth; Treta Yuga, the age of mental power; Dwapara Yuga, the age of energy; and then Kali Yuga, the dark age. And it's descending consciousness, and then it comes up again, ascending. Kali Yuga, dark; Dwapara, energy; Treta, mental powers; Satya, truth. Endless cycles of ascending and descending energy. Where are we right now? Well, we're not in such a high age, in case you haven't noticed. We're out of the dark age, but we're just at the beginning of the age of energy. And this is a time of great turbulence, because what does this watershed between Kali Yuga and Dwapara Yuga, what does it represent? Kali Yuga is when human consciousness is very limited in form. Religions are separate from each other. Tribes are separate from each other. There's no understanding that they're anything but the physical limitation. And then if we want to look at historical events within relatively modern history, Dwapara Yuga began around 1900. What happened then? A young man working in a Swiss patent office, his name was Albert Einstein. People thought he wasn't too bright. His teachers kind of didn't give him good grades, told him don't pursue an academic career. But he was obsessed with the light. And he thought about it, and he talked about it. And he came up with the formula that E = mc squared, the theory of relativity, that energy and mass were contiguous. They were not separate realities, that the underlying reality behind form was energy. And Yogananda paralleled this in his own way, because what he taught us and what the message that he brought is that we are not limited by our physical bodies. We are not limited by the things we have or the country or religion we were born in. We are energy. And that energy can be awakened. And not only did he teach this, but he gave us techniques to experience it. He developed this technique which he called his unique contribution to the field of yoga, the energization exercises, which he recommended that you do twice daily to become aware of yourself as beings of energy, that you can control that energy. You can send it to the different body parts. You can heal yourself. You can heal others. Age of energy, techniques of energy. He brought meditation techniques, and the acme of all of them, Kriya Yoga, which again is to awaken the inner flow of energy. When Jyotish said the true altar is the altar of the central nervous system, what does that mean? We're not talking about our spinal cord and our neurons and so forth. We're talking about the subtle energetic body that as we raise that energy to different centers of awareness and ultimately to the spiritual eye, we awaken to our true potential on all levels, physically, intellectually, energetically, success in the world, but most important, our unity with God. So in this age of energy, Yogananda came. I will show you the way. I will show you the truth behind this world that seems so, where happiness seems so elusive. Today is a good day, tomorrow's a bad day. Today I'm well, tomorrow I'm sick, then I'm well again. Today I feel low and depressed, tomorrow I feel high and happy. You can control these things by controlling the energy. Each one of us can, and that's the message he came to bring. And so in these great cycles of time, when we say he had a mission of 100 years, he had a mission of thousands of years. Because what he brought was not just him deciding to come to the West, it was the will of great enlightened Himalayan masters. And those of you who have read Autobiography of a Yogi, Babaji, the deathless master, said, I am going to pick a teacher to send to the West and to show to everything that Jyotish was talking about, the unity of religion, the unity of cultures and creeds, the equality of women. When you read his Autobiography of a Yogi, I was just thinking about this. The number of women saints that he mentions are very great. It's not just the domain of the traditional, the men and so forth. Equality of women, equality of people, equality of races and religions. And how can we begin to understand this, not by just mental ecumenical councils, but by feeling the energy, the true energy behind all religions. And he came to show us that we could have, and this was unique, a personal relationship with God, unique in the West, not in the East, a personal relationship with God. We don't learn this in our Western religions, any of them. That God is within us. We can talk with him. He can talk with us because we are energy and he is energy. And we are a part of him, her, Divine Mother, Heavenly Father. And so, yes, Yogananda got on that ship in 1920. And I found this very interesting. What was the name of the ship? Anybody know? City of Sparta. What was Sparta? Sparta was that one small city-state in Greece that were trained warriors. For those of you who have seen the movie 300, it talks about Sparta. But what did it represent? You shall not pass. They withheld, I get chills when I talk about it, they withheld the Persian army, hundreds of thousands of them, that were trying to invade Greece on a very narrow little peninsula that they were invading. 300 of them against hundreds of thousands. That was the Spartans. And that was Yogananda came on the city of Sparta. One man against the millions of materialistic people. But he held at bay the forces of materialism. And he launched a new culture of unity and vision of a divine potential in life. And what did he do when he came to America, when he first landed? Yes, he gave a talk at this conference in Boston he was invited to. But then by his own description, he said, and he lived very humbly. He didn't have friends, he didn't have much money. In fact, a friend of ours who is immigrated from Russia some years ago, he did some research in the Boston Maritime Archives, and he found the ship's manifest of the city of Sparta, because our friend Dimitri said, I came to this country as an immigrant, so did my guru, and I wanted to know more about him. So there amongst all the other passengers, you see listed Mukunda Lal Ghosh, 27 years old. Any characteristics on his body? Scar on his right forearm. Remember in Autobiography when they lanced the boil? Those of you know that I'm talking about. Money, $500. Religion, Hinduism. Political affiliation, because the British were watching every Indian that went here or there at that time. None. No political affiliation, Master said. He didn't want anybody tracking him down. But there he landed. He gave the talk, but then what? He lived in a little YMCA in Boston, a little room. And what did he do during that time? He learned English better. He perfected English, he said, for a year or two. And I began to try to understand the American mentality. How am I going to present this mission? And he began figuring out how to adapt these incredible, profound, life-transforming teachings of the Vedas of India, of the masters of yoga, to present them to Americans of this time. And he began adapting his talks. And he said, I knew Americans were practical. I understood they were practical. They wanted specific things to do, and they needed an understanding of how these could improve their own lives, and that they had a lot of energy. They weren't happy just to sit and be talked to. And so I did that. And he said some of the students in the early days said, oh, we want more philosophy. And he said, okay, you want more philosophy? I'll give you philosophy. He said they all fell asleep. So after that, no, he made it practical. He talked to women's clubs and men's clubs and business clubs, and he talked to, in Washington, D.C., you'll see where there was a lot of segregation. He went to churches of Black Americans, and he lectured there. But there was no area he wouldn't go into. Adapting the teachings, making them practical, making them understandable. And his guru in India, Swami Sri Yukteswar, was a little uncertain if he was heading off in the wrong direction with adapting them. And he said, are you changing these teachings? Because those who have read autobiography know Sri Yukteswar was not someone to trifle with. And he said, no, Yogananda said to his guru, no, master. He said, you are the goldsmith. You work in the pure metal of gold. I am the jeweler. I fashion them so people can wear them. And his guru said, that I understand. You have my blessings. So he began adapting his teachings and making them practical for people and rolling them out. And Jyotish mentioned he spoke at many halls. He spoke at the LA Philharmonic, filling it for weeks. And why? What was it that he had? It was the power of the magnetism of God, not just him. He said, I am nothing, but God can flow through me. And that's what people felt, and it thrilled them, and it changed their lives. And they came more. But after a period of time, he wanted to work with more serious students. So as we know, in the late 20s, he established his base camp here in Los Angeles, which he called the Benares of the West. Benares is one of the most sacred cities of India. And I want you, Angelinos, to appreciate this, because we've been driving around the city in these last days. Yes, LA is busy and noisy and traffic and et cetera, lots of movies and billboards. But underneath it, there is an energy of higher consciousness. Yogananda would not have chosen this place as his base of operations if that wasn't true. So try, amidst your busy life, if you meditate, if you do yoga, try to tune in to the underlying vibration of this area. Yogananda poured so much energy here. And so then he began working with more serious students. And he wrote, as Jyotish mentioned, his lessons. He wrote Autobiography of a Yogi. And that came out, it was published in 1946. And we have been a part of the Ananda community outside of Nevada City for more than 15 years. But many of us who came in those first years, who have committed our lives to his path, to seeking him, many of us were born in 1946. It was like, okay, Master, we heard, we're coming, we'll do whatever you need. And so we have. And it is so thrilling. And let me just see how much time we have left. A little bit of time, a couple of minutes. It is so thrilling to travel around the world, and we do. And throughout India, we have people that go throughout Latin America, Mexico, all over the United States, all over Europe, and to see, you can just recognize, maybe you can't speak the language, but you recognize that Yogananda has touched their lives. You see it in their eyes, you see it in their demeanor, and that maybe they don't meditate every day, maybe their lives are kind of locked up in a lot of outward turmoil, But nevertheless, Yogananda has touched their lives. And this is the mission in this age of energy, in this time of turmoil in which we live, where you don't know what truth is. You don't know, it's obscure, moral values, truth, dharma, right action. It's hard to find. But Yogananda came, and he said in one of his beautiful prayer poems, he said, I come to tell you all of him, and the discipline that brings his grace, and the way to encase him in your bosom. The discipline that brings his grace is the practice of yoga, meditation, Kriya Yoga. The way to encase him in your bosom is devotion. Devotion to God. And here Yogananda came, in many ways, a simple child of Divine Mother. But he came to the cold shores of America, and he spoke of his love for God and his love for Divine Mother, and everyone knew that what he said was true, because he lived it. And so, for each of us, I know this is true for Jyotish, me, those of us who are working here at our centers in the greater Los Angeles area, throughout the world. We have said, Master, you left this world in 1952, but just like the Spartan army, we will pick up the banner. We will keep your work going. Not in a egoic way, us alone, but we will be part of your army. And I hope that you too, whether it's just creating a little sanctuary in your own home where you love God, where you worship God, to keep that spark that he ignited the West with in his lifetime, to take that spark, light your own candle from it, place it on your altar, and hold that candle in your heart. And everyone who you meet, that spark that he ignited, that you have captured through your own practice and devotion, share it with others. Share that light. Share that love of God. And in this way, Yogananda's work is just beginning. Just as Christ's work in his lifetime, how many people it reached, but now it changed the course of Western history. Yogananda's work will change the course of global history, and it's just begun. So thank you for coming, and we have a little special thing now. Peter is going to bring up a book. Jyotish and I write a weekly blog called Touch of Light, and you're all welcome to subscribe if you go to ananda.org. That's our main website. It's a weekly blog, and we alternate. 1 week Jyotish writes, 1 week I write. And people like it enough that they've compiled it into books. The first one came out, was Touch of Light. The next one was Touch of Joy. So each one represents 2 years of weekly blogs. And this one is Touch of Love. And we're going to be launching it. And if you like, you can come over and we'll sign a copy for you. And these are 2 years of weekly blogs based on the teachings of our great Guru. And we offer them to you in his spirit of love and blessing. So, this is the official book launch.
Slide it on. We're just about a really long
So if you're one of those people that likes to participate, come and grab some rose petals.
So this is the book, A Touch of Love.